Picture this. You're walking through your favorite park on a sunny afternoon. Birds are chirping, children are laughing in the distance, and everything feels perfectly normal. But what you don't know is that beneath your feet, hidden in the shadows of those same trees you find so peaceful, lie secrets so dark and disturbing that they would make your blood run cold. Today, I'm going to tell you 3 true stories that will forever change how you look at parks. Stories so terrifying that local authorities tried to keep them quiet. Stories that prove that sometimes the most beautiful places hide the most horrific truths. But before we dive into these nightmare scenarios, let me warn you, these aren't just stories. These are real events that happen to real people. And if you think you can handle what's coming, then buckle up, because what you're about to hear will haunt your dreams tonight. On the evening of March 15th, 2019, Sarah Chen decided to go for her usual night run through Riverside Park in Portland, Oregon. Sarah was a dedicated fitness enthusiast who had been running this same route for over 3 years. She knew every tree, every bench, every twist and turn of the winding trail that snaked through the 200-acre park. What Sarah didn't know was that someone had been watching her. Someone had been studying her routine, memorizing her schedule, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. At exactly 9:47 p.m., Sarah laced up her running shoes and headed into the park. The temperature was perfect, a cool 65 degrees, and the moon was bright enough to illuminate the main trail without needing a flashlight. She had her earbuds in, her favorite playlist pumping, completely unaware of the danger lurking just beyond the tree line. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed normal. Sarah maintained her usual pace, breathing steadily as she navigated the familiar path. But as she rounded the bend near the old oak tree, something felt different. Call it intuition, call it survival instinct, but something deep in her gut told her she wasn't alone. She slowed her pace and pulled out one earbud. The park was eerily quiet, too quiet. No rustling leaves, no distant traffic noise, not even the sound of crickets, just her own heavy breathing and the soft thud of her footsteps on the dirt trail. That's when she heard it. Footsteps behind her, matching her pace perfectly. Sarah's heart rate spiked, but she tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just another jogger. Maybe she was being paranoid. She picked up her pace slightly, hoping to create some distance. But the footsteps behind her sped up too, staying exactly the same distance away. Now, panic began to set in. Sarah pulled out her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. She was in the dead center of the park, surrounded by dense trees that blocked all cell tower reception. She was completely cut off from the outside world. The footsteps were getting closer. Sarah broke into a full sprint, abandoning her usual route and crashing through the underbrush, desperate to reach the park exit. Branches scratched at her face and arms as she ran blindly through the darkness. Behind her, she could hear her pursuer crashing through the same branches, getting closer with each step. Her lungs were burning, her legs felt like jelly, but she kept running. She had to reach the street. She had to reach safety. But as she burst through a cluster of bushes, she realized with horror that she had no idea where she was. In her panic, she had gotten completely turned around. She was lost in the middle of a park she thought she knew like the back of her hand. The footsteps stopped. Sarah froze, trying to control her breathing so she could listen. The silence was deafening. Where was her pursuer? Why had they stopped? Were they gone? Or were they hiding, waiting for her to make the next move? Minutes passed. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure whoever was out there could hear it. She slowly reached for her phone, hoping against hope that she had found a spot with signal. The screen lit up, casting an eerie glow in the darkness. One bar, just one bar of signal. With trembling fingers, Sarah dialed 911. The call connected, but the line was crackling with static. 911. What's your emergency? I'm being followed, Sarah whispered. I'm lost in Riverside Park and someone is chasing me. Ma'am, I can barely hear you. Can you speak up? Sarah opened her mouth to respond when she heard it. The unmistakable sound of breathing. Close. Too close. Right behind her. She spun around and saw a figure standing just 10 feet away. A man, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes that made him almost invisible in the shadows. But what terrified Sarah the most wasn't what she could see. It was what she couldn't see. The man's face was completely obscured by darkness, as if the shadows themselves were clinging to him. The man took a step forward. Sarah screamed and ran. She crashed through bushes, leaped over fallen logs, and stumbled down a steep embankment. She could hear the man behind her, his footsteps never faltering, never growing distant. He was gaining on her. Just when Sarah thought her legs would give out completely, she saw it. A light. The park exit. She had never been so happy to see the glow of a streetlight in her entire life. She burst out of the park and onto the sidewalk, nearly getting hit by a passing car. The driver slammed on his brakes and rolled down his window. "Lady, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sarah spun around to look back at the park entrance. There was no one there. The man who had been chasing her had vanished completely, as if he had never existed at all. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the entire park with flashlights and dogs, but found no trace of Sarah's pursuer. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing. It was as if Sarah had been running from a phantom. But here's where the story gets truly disturbing. Over the next few weeks, the police received 7 more reports of a similar figure chasing joggers through Riverside Park. 7 different people, all describing the same tall, thin man whose face seemed to be made of shadows. The last report came from a jogger named Mike Rodriguez on April 3rd. Mike never made it out of the park. His body was found 3 days later in a section of the park so remote that most people didn't even know it existed. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but Mike was 28 years old and in perfect health. The autopsy revealed something that still gives investigators nightmares. Mike's body showed signs of being chased for hours. His feet were bloody and torn, his clothes shredded by branches, and his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Whatever had been chasing him through that park had literally scared him to death. To this day, Riverside Park closes at sunset. The official reason given by the city is budget cuts and safety concerns. But locals know the truth. They know that once the sun goes down, something emerges from the shadows of those trees. Something that enjoys the hunt. Something that feeds on fear. And if you ever find yourself jogging through a park at night, and you hear footsteps behind you matching your pace perfectly, remember Mike Rodriguez. Remember Sarah Chen. And whatever you do, don't look back. In June 2020, the Henderson family decided to have their annual reunion at Pine Ridge State Park in Colorado. It was supposed to be a weekend of fun, food, and catching up with relatives they hadn't seen in months due to the pandemic. The park was perfect for their needs, with picnic areas, hiking trails, and a beautiful lake where the kids could swim. What the Henderson family didn't know was that they weren't the first group to choose this particular spot, and they definitely weren't the first family to go missing from Pine Ridge State Park. The reunion started on Friday afternoon with 23 family members. ranging from 6-year-old little Emma to 78-year-old Grandpa Joe. They had reserved the large pavilion near the lake and had brought enough food to feed a small army. Everything was going perfectly. Friday night passed without incident. The family roasted marshmallows, told stories, and enjoyed each other's company under a canopy of stars. Some of the younger adults pitched tents nearby, while others had booked rooms at a motel about 20 minutes away. Saturday morning is when things started to go wrong. Emma's mother, Lisa, woke up to find that her daughter's sleeping bag was empty. Emma had been sleeping right next to her in their tent, but now she was gone. Lisa immediately assumed Emma had gotten up early to use the bathroom, or maybe to play by the lake. But when Lisa checked the bathroom facilities, Emma wasn't there. Neither were Emma's shoes, which had been placed neatly outside the tent the night before. Lisa tried not to panic. Maybe Emma had gone to find her cousins. Maybe she was with Grandpa Joe, who always woke up early. But as Lisa made her way around the campsite, calling Emma's name, a cold dread began to settle in her stomach. Emma was nowhere to be found. By 8 a.m., the entire family was searching. They spread out across the park, calling Emma's name and checking every possible hiding spot. The park rangers were notified, and within 2 hours, a full-scale search and rescue operation was underway. But here's where the story takes its first disturbing turn. As the search teams combed through the park, they made a discovery that chilled everyone to the bone. About a quarter-mile from the Henderson family's campsite, searchers found a child's shoe hanging from a tree branch about 15 feet off the ground. It was Emma's shoe. How does a 6-year-old girl's shoe end up hanging from a tree branch that high? Emma was barely 4 feet tall. Even if she had been climbing, which her family insisted she never did, there was no way she could have reached that height. The search continued through Saturday and into Sunday. Helicopters circled overhead, search dogs tracked scents through the dense forest, and volunteers from nearby towns joined the effort. But as the hours passed, hope began to fade. That's when Uncle Robert made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Robert had wandered farther from the main search area than he was supposed to. He was following what looked like a faint trail deeper into the woods when he came across a clearing he had never seen before. In the center of the clearing was an old, rusty picnic table surrounded by what looked like the remnants of several campsites. But these weren't normal campsites. The fire pits were arranged in a perfect circle around the picnic table. Personal items were scattered around the area, but they looked like they had been there for years. A child's toy truck, faded and weathered. A woman's purse, the leather cracked and moldy. A pair of men's glasses, the lenses shattered. And hanging from the trees around the clearing like macabre decorations were more shoes, dozens of them. Men's shoes, women's shoes, children's shoes of all sizes. All of them old, all of them weathered, and all of them hanging from branches too high for any normal person to reach. Robert stumbled backward, his heart racing. He pulled out his phone to call the search coordinators, but just like in our first story, there was no signal. The trees were too dense, and he was too far from civilization. That's when he heard it. A voice calling his name. Robert. Robert. Over here. It sounded like Emma. It sounded exactly like his 6-year-old niece calling for her uncle. But something about the voice was wrong. It was coming from deeper in the woods, from a direction where no 6-year-old should be able to go. Emma? Robert called out. Emma, is that you? Come find me, Uncle Robert. I'm scared. Every instinct Robert had told him not to follow that voice. Something about it was off, unnatural, but it sounded so much like Emma. And if there was even a chance that his niece was out there, scared and alone, he had to try. Robert followed the voice deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker, the undergrowth more tangled. Several times he had to crawl under fallen logs or squeeze between closely growing trunks. This was not terrain that a small child could navigate. "Emma, keep calling so I can find you." "I'm here, Uncle Robert. I'm right here." But the voice seemed to be coming from all directions now. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from up in the trees. And sometimes, when Robert stopped moving and really listened, it didn't sound quite like Emma anymore. It sounded like someone doing a very good impression of Emma, but getting the details slightly wrong. Robert had been following the voice for over an hour when he realized he was completely lost. The sun was setting, and he had no idea which direction would lead him back to the search party. Worse, his phone was completely dead, and he hadn't thought to bring a flashlight. As darkness fell, the voice stopped calling his name. The forest became eerily quiet, except for one sound that made Robert's blood run cold. Footsteps. All around him, from every direction, he could hear the sound of multiple people walking through the forest. But these weren't normal footsteps. They were perfectly synchronized, like a group of people marching in formation. And they were getting closer. Robert ran. He crashed through the underbrush, stumbled over roots, and slammed into trees in the darkness. Behind him, the synchronized footsteps never faltered, never grew distant. If anything, they were getting closer. Just when Robert thought he was going to collapse from exhaustion, he saw lights ahead. Flashlights. The search party had found him. "Robert! Robert! Where have you been? We've been looking for you for hours." Robert collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. "The clearing," he managed to say. "The shoes in the trees." Emma's voice. The search coordinator knelt beside him. "Robert, you're not making sense. What clearing? What shoes?" When Robert tried to lead the search party back to the clearing he had found, they couldn't locate it. Even with GPS coordinates from where they had found Robert, the clearing seemed to have vanished. Multiple search teams combed the area for the next 3 days, but found nothing. Emma Henderson was never found. The official investigation concluded that she had wandered off and gotten lost in the woods, possibly falling into one of the park's many deep ravines. Her body was never recovered. But here's what the official investigation didn't include. In the weeks following Emma's disappearance, park rangers started receiving reports from other visitors. Reports of children's voices calling from deep in the woods. Reports of shoes hanging from impossible heights in the trees. Reports of synchronized footsteps following hikers who ventured too far from the main trails. Pine Ridge State Park was quietly closed to overnight camping 6 months later. The official reason was environmental protection. But the real reason was that 3 more families had reported missing children. Children who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a single shoe hanging from a tree branch that no human could reach. The Henderson family never had another reunion. How could they? Every family gathering would be a reminder of little Emma, who answered a voice in the woods that should never have known her name. Marcus Webb was a professional nature photographer who had spent over 15 years capturing the beauty of America's national and state parks. His work had been featured in National Geographic, and he had a reputation for venturing into remote locations that most people would never see. In October 2021, Marcus received a commission to photograph Whispering Pines Nature Preserve in northern Montana for a travel magazine. The preserve was relatively new, having been established only 5 years earlier, and tourism officials were eager to attract more visitors to the area. Marcus arrived at the preserve on a cold Tuesday morning. The autumn colors were at their peak, and the lighting was perfect for the shots he had in mind. He packed his equipment and headed out on the main trail, planning to spend the entire day exploring and photographing different areas of the preserve. For the first few hours, everything went exactly as planned. Marcus captured stunning shots of golden aspens, crystal clear streams, and wildlife that seemed completely unafraid of his presence. The preserve was everything the tourism board had promised, and more. It was around 2 p.m. when Marcus decided to venture off the main trail. He had spotted an interesting rock formation in the distance and thought it would make for a compelling photograph. He marked his GPS location and headed into the unmarked wilderness. The rock formation was even more impressive up close. Ancient granite boulders carved by centuries of wind and weather created natural arches and caves that would be perfect for his portfolio. Marcus spent nearly an hour setting up different shots, adjusting his equipment, and waiting for the light to be just right. That's when he noticed something odd through his camera lens. In the viewfinder, he could see what looked like fabric caught on a branch about 50 yards away. At first, he thought it might be a piece of trash left by a careless hiker. But as he zoomed in with his telephoto lens, Marcus realized it wasn't trash at all. It was a piece of clothing. A torn piece of what looked like a bright red jacket. Marcus lowered his camera and looked in the direction of the fabric with his naked eye. He could barely make it out from this distance, but through the camera lens, it was clearly visible. That was strange. His camera was good, but it wasn't that good. Curious, Marcus packed up his equipment and made his way toward the piece of fabric. As he got closer, he could see that it wasn't just caught on a branch. It was tied to the branch, as if someone had deliberately placed it there as a marker. But a marker for what? Marcus looked around the area where the fabric was tied. At first, everything looked normal. Just trees, rocks, and fallen leaves. But as he examined the ground more carefully, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The leaves weren't distributed naturally. They had been arranged, piled up in specific areas, as if someone had been trying to cover something up. Marcus pulled out a stick and carefully pushed aside one of the leaf piles. What he found underneath still gives him nightmares to this day. It was a human hand, partially decomposed, but unmistakably human. Marcus stumbled backward, his heart pounding. He needed to call the police immediately. But when he reached for his phone, he discovered the same problem that had plagued the victims in our previous stories. No signal. He was too far from civilization, surrounded by too many trees. But Marcus was an experienced outdoorsman. He knew he could follow his GPS back to the main trail and get help. He just needed to mark this location so the authorities could find it again. As Marcus was programming the coordinates into his GPS device, he noticed something that chilled him to the bone. According to his GPS, he had been walking in a straight line for the past 20 minutes. But when he looked behind him, he could see his own footprints curving and winding through the trees, as if he had been walking in circles. That was impossible. Marcus had been watching his GPS the entire time. He had been walking in a perfectly straight line toward the fabric on the branch. So why did his footprints tell a different story? Marcus decided to test something. He aimed his camera back toward the rock formation where he had started and looked through the viewfinder. In the camera's display, he could see the rocks clearly, maybe 100 yards away in a straight line. But when he lowered the camera and looked with his naked eye, the rocks were nowhere to be seen. According to what his eyes were telling him, he was surrounded by dense forest in all directions. Something was very wrong with this place. Marcus raised his camera again and used the viewfinder to navigate back toward the rocks. Step by step, he followed what the camera showed him, even though his eyes insisted he was walking into solid trees. It was like being in two different realities at the same time. When he finally reached the rock formation, Marcus was shaking. Nothing like this had ever happened to him before. He had photographed in dozens of remote locations, but never had he experienced anything that defied logic so completely. Marcus quickly packed his equipment and used his GPS to find his way back to the main trail. Every few minutes, he would stop and take a photo behind him, just to make sure he wasn't walking in circles again. Through his camera lens, his path looked straight and normal. But his actual footprints, visible on the ground, continued to curve and wind as if he was drunk or disoriented. It took Marcus over 3 hours to reach the parking lot, a journey that should have taken 45 minutes at most. When he finally reached his car, the sun was already setting, and he was mentally and physically exhausted. Marcus immediately drove to the nearest town and reported his discovery to the local sheriff's office. A search and rescue team were dispatched the next morning, using the GPS coordinates Marcus had recorded. They found nothing. According to the search team, the coordinates Marcus had given them led to a section of the preserve that was completely unremarkable. No rock formations, no red fabric tied to branches, and definitely no human remains. Just normal forest. But Marcus knew what he had seen. He had the photographs to prove it. Except when Marcus reviewed his photos that evening, he discovered something that made him question his own sanity. Every photo he had taken in that area showed normal forest scenery. Trees, rocks, fallen leaves. Nothing unusual. Nothing that matched his memory of the experience. But there was one photo that stood out. A picture he didn't remember taking. According to the timestamp, it was captured right around the time he had found the human hand. But instead of showing remains or disturbed ground, the photo showed something else entirely. It showed Marcus himself, standing in the forest, looking directly at the camera. But Marcus had been alone. There had been no one there to take his picture. In the photo, Marcus looked terrified. His face was pale, his eyes were wide with fear, and his mouth was open as if he was screaming. But Marcus had no memory of posing for this photo. He had no memory of being scared. In fact, until he saw the photo, he had remembered feeling calm and in control throughout most of the experience. Marcus tried to return to Whispering Pines Nature Preserve several times over the next few months, but he could never find the area where he had made his discovery. It was as if that section of the forest had simply ceased to exist. The tourism board never published Marcus's photographs. Officially, they said the images didn't meet their quality standards. But Marcus suspects the real reason is that they knew something was wrong with that place. Something that would keep tourists away forever if they found out about it. Marcus gave up nature photography 6 months later. He couldn't explain what had happened to him in that preserve, but he knew he never wanted to experience it again. To this day, he refuses to enter any forest alone. And sometimes late at night, Marcus will review that impossible photograph on his camera. The one that shows him screaming in terror at something he can't remember. And in the background of that photo, barely visible in the shadows between the trees, are shapes that look almost human. Shapes that seem to be watching him. Shapes that shouldn't be there at all. These 3 stories happened in different states, in different years, to different people. But they all have one thing in common. They all took place in locations that were supposed to be safe. Places where families go to relax, where people go to connect with nature, where children should be able to play without fear. But as these stories prove, sometimes the most beautiful places hide the most horrific secrets. Sometimes the thing you should be most afraid of isn't the wildlife, or the weather, or getting lost. Sometimes the thing you should fear most is something that has been waiting in those woods far longer than any of us can imagine. The next time you visit a park, remember Sarah Chen running for her life through Riverside Park. Remember little Emma Henderson, whose voice still calls out from the woods where she was never found. Remember Marcus Webb, who discovered that sometimes what we see isn't what's really there. And remember this, there are places in this world where the normal rules don't apply. Places where reality bends and twists in ways that our minds can't comprehend. Places where things that should not exist continue to lurk, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor to wander off the beaten path. Sweet dreams tonight. And maybe, just maybe, avoid walking through any parks after dark. Because you never know what might be out there, watching you from the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity to add your story to the collection of disappearances that park rangers would rather forget. The wilderness is calling, but maybe, this time, you shouldn't answer. After all, some trails are meant to be left unexplored. Some voices are meant to be ignored. And some photographs should never be taken at all. This has been your journey into the dark side of nature, where beauty and horror exist side by side, separated only by a few steps off the main trail. Until next time, stay on the path. Your life might depend on it. If these stories made your skin crawl, like the video, it tells the algorithm you survived. Subscribe and turn on the bell. We drop new nightmares regularly. Share with someone brave, or someone who thinks they are. Comment below. We want to know what you would have done. Some stories don't end when the lights come on. This is Dread Dynasty. We'll see you in the next scare.